Chapter 14. Organizing a Race for Action. Just as it is in the case of Africa and black people everywhere, the central problem of over 30 million blacks in the United States is unity. Nothing will ever be achieved by such a minority group in white America. Nothing that leads to real adjustment for progress until a powerful unity movement among blacks develops throughout the United States. This must be done to achieve full recognition even as men and women, not to mention full citizenship. As a larger and larger measure of nationwide unity is achieved, the next two steps should be in the direction of chartering a practical line of advance and of action. Once the courses of action are carefully and sensibly planned, the picture of several thousand black organizations, each independent and vying for leadership, is substantially the same picture of fragmentation and disunity in Africa that led to the downfall of the whole race. We have also seen that even in earliest times, very often all that was involved was that somebody wanted to be the head, was not getting there fast enough, and therefore organized his own little state. Most of them perished, picked off one by one. The same thing will happen to any black organizations standing alone that disturb the white mind. The obstacles to unity are so great that the outlook is both discouraging and frightening to all but the strong with the will to both survive and overcome. The very first major obstacle to be overcome involves a mental revolution out of which black America faces up to the stark reality that white America as a whole is its enemy, that blacks will be recognized only in a subordinate role, that the scattering of black office holders, high and low, really means nothing to the race as a whole, that there are actually two sets of laws as administered, one for whites and one for blacks, just as there are two sets of wages and prices. And finally, that the blacks' loyalty and devotion to the whites, in spite of all they have done and still do against them, mystifies the whites themselves, and confirms anew their belief that such humble dog attitudes indicate inferiority independently of everything else. Until black Americans are quite clear in their own minds about their real situation in this country, all talk about unity and achieving equal justice will be just that, useless talk. But with a clear understanding of reality, the specific studies and planning for a broad program for securing racial unity and progress can begin. No one would propose that 30 million blacks be brought under a single umbrella of leadership, nor is that necessary. But an organizing national conference should develop a program designed to form hundreds of organizations into one vast national body of millions, with each society carrying on its own functions as before, except in matters concerning the whole race, or organized by families and individuals, community by community, and state by state. Where the matter concerns the whole race, affiliated groups would speak in one voice through the overall organization of the race. Footnote: examples might be nationwide boycotts, U.S. support and supply of arms and bomber planes to Portugal and South Africa, domestic and international trade policies that affect black world, and similar matters about which not a single existing black organization could have any effect at all. End of footnote. But since the overall race organization will be directly involved in promoting definite action programs on all fronts, the members of all affiliated groups will also be members of the overall race organization. The separatist movement of whites gave Negro integrationalists another shock, showing them how utterly dependent they had been on white enterprise for just about everything, even in all black neighborhoods before the whites left their own exclusive sections. But the shock did not affect their dependent mentality. In an all-black community of 100,000 people, there were only 3 black-owned grocery stores, and very small ones at that, compared with 75 white-operated stores. Not a single black-owned hardware store, 7 white, or laundry, 15 white-owned laundromats, etc. In a city of nearly 1 million blacks, there is not a single black-owned department store or any other important enterprise. We have left it all to the whites, just as though they alone can create jobs and job opportunities. The perpetual hat-in-hand cry of poverty must end. What we have too much of is the poverty of spirit. Nor will the lack of finance alibi stand, for in spite of our lower incomes, we waste millions in luxuries. What we lack is the chain store vision and the enterprising spirit that organizes groups fully able to launch large-scale community-financed undertaking. The white withdrawal created citywide black communities. Most of the first-class services went to the suburbs. The blacks must now fill the gaps on all fronts, must prove their worth. The time for big talking is over. The time for big action is here. That is why a nationwide movement for unity in one vast organization of millions is the road to constructive action through the various black communities of the country. Wanted: all prisoners to enlist. Organizing the race for action must include a carefully developed plan for tapping and drawing on some unused and rejected sources of strength. These are our prisoners and former prisoners, for among the many problems which the blacks themselves must solve is crime, and primarily because almost all crimes committed by blacks are against blacks, not whites. There must be some program of action in sheer self-defense. Both crime and the fears for safety it breeds will begin to disappear in the black community only when some such programs for unity, for opportunities and public education as outlined in this work gets underway. These offenders do not know that they are enlisted in the white man's army to slowly destroy the race. The war takes many unsuspecting forms, including the big and increasingly widespread use of narcotics among blacks, and an armed surrounding suburbia trained by, quote, sportsmen and target clubs, nationwide task forces specifically trained for inner city operations. The list goes on and on. The community must be made safe for people to live and work there happily and without fears for themselves or their children. Therefore, the blacks themselves must have a program. Here is where community control, about which we hear so much, should begin. The first anti-crime steps might be widespread information, which is education, about the true meaning of blacks' crimes, almost exclusively against blacks, and secondly, the community development plans that are designed to create more opportunities for all. There are other possible programs that could radically reduce crime, programs short of the final step. For if all else fails, the community, each community, should open an all-out war along lines determined by the community. No such final course will be necessary, however, if the black community becomes a truly functioning community in fact. For then there would be so much work to be done in an overall race movement that the so-called criminal, in jail or out, would have a society not only to return to, but one that welcomes him warmly and needs him or her urgently. As things now stand, all this talk about returning to society is sheer idiocy. What society? The only society I know about is as criminal and oppressive outside of the penal institutions as are its representatives inside of them. The big difference is only in the bigness of society in general, the bigness of crime off the street and up in high places, and the bigness of the hostility to and rejection of the men coming out of prisons by the very same society to which they are expected to return and adjust. We are, whether we realize it or not, imprisoned inseparably with our confined prisoners, ex-prisoners, and those who are headed for places behind walls. We are together. Who is going to be murdered then? Raped? Robbed? The whites? Of course not, and for several clear-cut reasons. The first may not seem obvious, but blacks who so readily make criminal attacks on their own people are unconsciously striking out against the unbearable situation of what appears to be permanent disunity and therefore the utter helplessness of a race whose liberation from oppression can be achieved only by united initiatives of its own. They, the so-called criminals and their youthful followers, expect nothing beneficial from the white world and see no reason for hope in their own. Hence, like caged animals, they strike at what is nearest to them, their own people. They are actually trying to kill a situation they hate, unaware that even in this they are serving the white man well. For the whites need not go all out for genocide schemes for which they are often charged, when blacks are killing themselves off daily on such a large scale. This brings us directly to the second reason why most crimes by blacks are against blacks, and not, as even the whites would expect, against whites. The unequal justice system of white America encourages blacks to commit crimes against blacks, and even rewards them with lighter sentences if convicted. Black life is cheap. Black womanhood is not honored. One may destroy either with both ease and relative protection. All this could be radically changed by a nationwide organization of the race with a new outlook program of a new kind of educational system, training when needed, and above all, enterprises as a job-creating system. The very first moves toward the creation of the kind of society that will give both pride and inspiration to black youth, and the kind of society that will have positive alternatives to crimes, and one to which every prisoner can return with hope. In such a society, the very expression ex-con or ex anything else would be rigorously banned. This would be a part of the new education about which I have spoken. All talk about reform and rehabilitation is just so much nonsense until society itself is reformed. For you can never rehabilitate men and women who have never been habilitated in the first place. You can never reform those who have never been allowed to be formed. Black society still has the spiritual qualities for the task. What is needed now is an honest and unselfish collective leadership. I have gone into some details in both outlining the most disturbing spots cast by the darkening shadows of history, and also trying to pinpoint what the possible signs of promise are. For the black world, history's watchmen could see no sign of promise, no sign of hope outside of a position of strength which unity alone can provide. But there will never be real unity without a plan and a program to sustain it. Petty power struggles, bickering and attacking each other are all signs of a death wish as a race. Which way then, you still enshackled blacks? 6,000 years of their history has answered, unite or perish. The tragedy that bloodied the pages in every period of their history because of disunity should be warning enough for the blacks of Africa, the Caribbeans, and elsewhere. But, being the one people who are generally ignorant of their history, it may well be that many will not see unity as a question of life or death. However, there has been so much history during the time of those now living that the precarious situation of the black race should be obvious to all. Only a largely united people can successfully confront oppressors and, without praying on bended knees or even pleading, secure the removal of all shackling chains. The choice is between unity of action in calm, careful thinking and planning the courses of action through one vast organization of millions. Either this or ultimate damnation. If the race is incapable of unity, it is incapable of survival as a free and equal people, and will deserve all the iniquities imposed upon it, for it will have proved beyond all question that it is indeed unfit to survive as a people free and equal in every respect whatsoever with the other peoples of the earth. What is proposed here is a moratorium on futile rhetoric and the beginning of real racial unity through an action program never attempted before. Therefore, black leadership obstacles will still be with us, and for the same ancient reasons. A mass organization expressly planned to enrich the lives of the people on all fronts, and directly through the people's ownership of and profit sharing in all economic enterprises. This will be too much for many leaders to adopt, except in principle. And any such all-Africa race movement in the United States will certainly be bitterly opposed by all Negro integrationists, because no whites would be in it. This, in their skewed minds, means black separatism. Black separatists, who are they? The simple truth is that the African people in the United States and throughout the world are not and never have been separatists. In fact, perhaps this has been their weakness. They have never really hated the whites, and they do not really hate whites now. What is taken for hatred when applied to blacks is their reaction against being hated, rejected, and oppressed. And the thinking whites know this very well. When they cry racism in reverse, or reverse discrimination and reverse segregation, they are saying in effect that only we whites may be racist. Only we whites may discriminate or segregate, but not you blacks. All white organizations that exclude blacks everywhere are normal and proper from the white perspective, but an all-black organization excluding whites? Perish the thought. Whites flee en masse from cities throughout the nation to avoid integrated schools and fair housing laws. These are the real separatists, not the blacks who never fled from the whites at all. Yet those blacks who said, "Let them go, let us not pursue them, let us stay where we are, stand on our own feet as men and women, and begin to build and improve our own schools and communities," these, not the whites, are denounced as separatists or black nationalists. The question which blacks must answer and act on, or remain forever exactly where they are, is how can a minority group in a situation distinctly different from that of any other minority successfully live and develop happily in an overwhelmingly white society? This is the question that faces us squarely in the critical times at the crossroads, and the decision must be taken as a race and by the race, rather than by self-appointed leaders. The term crossroads here must be taken more seriously than a mere metaphor, for a people may reach that intersection in life where the routes cross, leading in different directions. We only know the road over which we have just come, so at the crossroads we must pause, uncertain. Which way now? Which way should we go? The numerous movements led by charismatic leaders with catchy slogans to shout are roads many will take. The biggest crowd-drawing route will always be baited with some kind of religion, led by some prophet or mystic. For religion, any kind of religion, has been the means by which hope was maintained by a people without any basis for hope, and the search for real leaders has always been so desperate that the people flock to this or that promoter's movement, hoping that a true leader has been found at last. The personal wealth amassed by these leaders is a matter of pride for many of their followers. To the poor and ignorant who are being fleeced, even the palatial mansion with colorfully uniformed servants reflect the power and glory of their leader. Criticism is silenced, for these leaders are shrewd, natural psychologists. They know exactly what appeals to the deprived masses, what will give them a feeling of being somebody and uplifted. Thousands will continue to be exploited by the smarter ones who know all the tricks that stir the emotion and empty pocketbooks. And apparently, these countless thousands of faithful followers like it. There are several big organizations, each concerned with different aspects of the racial situation, which carry on successful and much needed work in their respective fields. Some were on the battlefront for the race when no one else was there. Without them, the situation of blacks in America would be far worse than it is. If we henceforth advance at all, no matter in what direction or how different, it will be from the foundations the best of these organizations have already laid. How long the black race will stand at the crossroads, uncertain what to do, confused, and, in fact, actually afraid. How long, only future history will tell. But one thing is certain, there is a way out. There is an open, untried road. That untried road to actual unity and the actual improvement of the lives of the black masses everywhere is exactly what is proposed in these pages, proposed in clear, concrete, and specific terms. The direction of civilization. Since, by the actual nature of things, racism will never be wished away, the human race could escape the predicted general war between races and reach a real state of civilization at last through a symbiotic society. There will be no pretense of love and brotherhood, which did not exist in fact. The fierce and increasing battles of the whites against integration illustrate the point most clearly. And this is why people of the African race will have to accept the harsh fact that they are rejected by the whites, back up and begin to reorganize for a position of power that commands respect, not love, and one that will therefore bring about the kind of cooperation and opportunities that eventuate in real equality and equal justice. Equality simply means the removal of every barrier that prevents a human being from realizing his fullest potential. Footnote: the doctrine of human equality has never meant the triumph of ignorance and incompetence over intelligence and industry. It never meant forcing those at the bottom to the top regardless of inability or lack of will. But it does mean that the ladder of opportunity should always be there for everyone to rise as high as he is able to climb and willing to go. End of footnote. To achieve the goal of survival and self-action, progress, the blacks do not have to withdraw anywhere to form a separatist society, for the whites themselves have created an even more completely black separatist society in their mad flights to the suburbs. Here we have all that is meant by symbiosis before our very eyes, living, concrete, and almost complete. For, having thus withdrawn to make their own separatist community more complete, the whites must not be allowed to perpetuate the lower status of blacks by also controlling and dominating the black community from which they fled. But this will mean something far more than the black people's fragmented programs of the 1960s, marching demonstrations, singing, praying in public squares, shouting protest and slogans, or even the frantic screams of "burn, baby, burn." Self-destroying, uncontrolled emotional outbursts must be checked precisely because they becloud the mind, make you just the easy targets the enemy is waiting for, and thereby prevent the kind of deliberate and rational thinking and planning that can not only defend and advance the lift of the community, but can help civilization itself to survive. Now it may well be that perceptive whites will be quick to see, probably even before blacks, that my reference to them as the traditional enemy of the race is not at all a call for increased hatred, tensions, and endless conflicts between the races. For those whites who have read even the high points of the record presented in this work will see with no trouble at all that I have singled out the exact routes to the kind of organized power and influence which will engage a subordinated people in self-improving activities that demonstrate visibly their equality as men and women throughout the world. The perceptive whites will also see quickly enough that reference to them as enemies of the race will be a threat to their absolute supremacy only if it causes the blacks to wake up, begin to realize how fragile is the basis for their present faith in the ultimate justice of the white man, and begin to unite to plan a different course, something they have never done before. Above all, they can see the great difference between the powerful force of a massive body organized on such a scale that it will actually represent the voice and will of blacks in America, and the relative powerlessness of individual organizations and black capitalist groups, important and desirable as each may be in itself. For they know that both the real economic and political power in the United States is silently exercised by the thoroughly organized giant corporations which, supported and financed by the tax-paying public with government grants and subsidies, operate realistic socialism at the top. How was all this power achieved? This is the important question here. Study their steps to unity, and be amazed, because no matter how diverse and competitive the giant corporations were, they formed step by step the most thoroughgoing system of overall unity in the world. At the summit of world corporate power, it is neither private nor free enterprise. Small business enterprises are indeed private, but they are free only in imagination. They are the dependent satellites of the all-powerful interlocking corporations and conglomerates. This quiet capitalistic socialism is interesting to study and compare with the openly proclaimed Marxist or state socialism. If we ignore the ideological principles and slogans that influence the masses, all appears actually anti-people and therefore anti-civilization. The main thrust of civilization, like religion itself, was toward a more humane society, piloted and guided by the upward march of the human spirit as man slowly advanced from beasthood to a higher and higher level of humankind. Blessed with a mind that enabled him to think, analyze, discover, and invent, he could now evolve education and promote the development of science and technology to further the advance of the whole human species. The medium of exchange, which in relatively recent times became money, was expanded to facilitate the spread of necessities of life for the common welfare. But somewhere back through the years, the whole upward trend was reversed as aggression, inspired by greed, led to the easy acquisition of both wealth and political power by the daring few at the expense of many. Mass poverty and the ignorance and disease which are its inseparable companions spread as the wealth belonging to all the people came to be owned or controlled by the few in every country, no matter what system or ideology it claims. This is not the direction civilization is supposed to take. We have what should be its reflection: advances in science, technology, great skyscraper cities, skies filled with aircraft, moon flights, improvements in everything but man himself, his murderous, greedy soul being still ages back there in the caves of his ancestors. For the blacks, who are the most victimized everywhere, their own situation can be radically changed in a program that regards money only as the means by which they can do the things that must be done through cooperation. For the kind of new cooperative organization we have been discussing will be different from those now existing in fundamental aims and objectives. The concept here is cooperation as the humane law of life, total and actual unity, brotherhood and sisterhood throughout the organization, and not just economic cooperatives such as stores, markets, housing, farms, etc., important as these will be. And we say this united movement toward a more humane economic system in the midst of a dog-eat-dog, money-mad, competitive society will be a movement in the direction of real civilization. The challenging question is whether blacks of the 20th century can recover enough of the vision, strength, and will of their forefathers who built the Great Pyramids to undertake the task of the present. The liberation of our minds. This is task number one. It will not be easy and will not be easily achieved in a single generation. The reasons have already been rather clearly set forth. The present-day confused outlook of the African people is the result of centuries of Caucasian acculturation, a quite natural process where one people come under the economic, political, and social domination of another people. The ideologies and value system of the oppressors quite unconsciously become those of the oppressed, even when the result is demonstratively against themselves. But all other oppressed peoples, whether Indian, Chinese, or Japanese, were able to hold on doggedly to their own racial pride and cultural heritage as the last resource for survival as a people. Unlike the blacks, they were never completely cut off from this sustaining lifeline of every people. In order to clear away some of the confusing cobwebs from our minds, we may be helped by rethinking through the following propositions. 1. Black Americans en masse are not going to emigrate to Africa or anywhere else. This is a fact equally true of all large black populations elsewhere outside of Africa. The real spirit of racial identity with the land of our forefathers and a real Pan-Africanism will emerge only in those black population areas which, through their own unified development programs, have reached the level of strength that enables them to maintain a permanent system of exchange in visits, goods, and services with the motherland and other areas. 2. Nobody is going to destroy the American system, and nobody is going to destroy either capitalism or communism. There will be no attempt here to go into detailed analysis to demonstrate why neither capitalism nor communism can be acceptable wholly by the African people. Draw on any beneficial elements in each. Yes, accept either one as our total system? No. Those who have been so brainwashed into ideological blindness that they cannot see that the actual political, economic, and social structures of capitalism and communism are substantially the same upper ruling classes, same elite classes, and the same controlled and exploited masses. Those unable to see this operating over the world before their very eyes will, of course, be unable to see what is presented here. 3. Since most blacks live within what is essentially a capitalist system, when they face up to the fact that neither they nor any other shouting group are going to destroy the system, then they will be in a position to plan how to deal with the system. They not only need not wholly accept it, but they should reject black capitalism as a solution of the economic bondage problems of the masses. For it must certainly be clear by now that my whole focus is on a system that directly benefits the people lower down, the most common people, and not just the further enrichment of blacks who are already well off and far ahead. And Africans in a capitalist state have the freedom to organize and do for themselves things they will never be allowed to do in any communist state. This all-important fact must be acknowledged even by the bitter enemies of the system simply because it is a fact. From this fact comes the opportunity for blacks to unite and develop a more humane economic system of a new kind of community cooperation, owned and controlled by the people in each community. 4. The white man as an enemy of blacks will become less and less a fact, and his hostile or contemptuous attitude will change to more and more respect if and when this race begins to move forward on 3 fronts. A. The first is the kind of massive organization, the very existence of which means the presence of an organized power to be reckoned with. B. The second is a nationwide economic development program promoted by the unified race organization as enterprises of a united people, as distinguished from those of private individuals and corporations. The aims would be the creation of career and general employment opportunities, a national foundation and central banking system to maintain and safeguard the financial resources required to carry on the work of the race, and without which can only remain a pleading and begging people. C. Political action. There is no question about better race relations developing as more and more members of the race register and vote, and the number of black officials elected to office increases. The recent notable increase in the number of black elected officials in the United States, be it remembered, resulted almost entirely from the existence of predominantly black communities after the whites had withdrawn to the suburbs. The bitter irony in this situation is that thousands of Negro integrationists quickly took advantage of this concentration of black political power to be elected to local, state, and national offices. If their program to break up all black communities and scatter sight the people among the whites had succeeded, they would never have been elected to office. The few well-known exceptions do not change the picture. Yet the great focus on today's black leaders, young and old, is on politics. That is understandable, for we are still in the talking stage and politics is a profession of talkers. The drive to increase the black vote should go on. The election of blacks to office should be accelerated. Still, the central questions will demand answers sooner or later. What kind of persons are we electing? After the politicians are elected to the various offices, who beside themselves actually benefit from all the campaigning and voting? How much real difference would it make in the situations of blacks in this country if we elected 15 U.S. senators, 100 congressmen, 5,000 state legislators, mayors, etc.? For what is well known is that some black officials, once elected to office, turn out to be as conservative and reactionary as any congressman from the backwoods of Mississippi. Yet, politics are too important to be left forever in present situations. Blacks need more political education on how to choose whom, or evaluating guidelines above the prevailing gift of gab. The respect of the whites, which was the point of departure, in the realm of politics may be very superficial indeed and tentative. Here he is seeking the black vote, seeking help in securing a better job and a better position of political power. Black political power can support, but never replace, an organized economic power system within the race itself that gives it the resources to do what has to be done. The only move that will command the respect for blacks as a people throughout the world. 5. The fifth barrier to the liberation of our minds would have been set forth first if we were proceeding in the order of importance or difficulty, for it is perhaps the most tragic and formidable. That mental blockage of total liberation developed from the way religion has been used to capture, enslave, and exploit the black people of the world for over 1,000 years. For the African people are, and have always been, a very religious and highly spiritual people. But we were also a religiously gullible people, believing that the religion of the foreigners and their belief in one supreme God, though called by different names, were essentially the same as our own. And this was right. What the blacks did not know, however, was that while both Christianity and Islam were in themselves great and acceptable faiths, they were being used by men whose main purposes were conquest and enslavement, in pursuit of economic and political power. The whole continent of Africa was taken over, its wealth exploited, and its people dehumanized through enslavement, all in the name of Jesus Christ, Allah, and civilization. Their success is always assured because when the spotlights of history are turned on and reveal that those conquest aims were for political domination and economic exploitation under the cover of religion, they scream that their religion itself is under attack, and their faithful followers believe it. Thus, the great religions of both Islam and Christianity have been disgraced by evil men with blood-curdling cries of jihad or holy war against black unbelievers, pagans. or the Christian missions of civilization that rationalized European conquests. The future task before black Muslims and black Christians is distinguishing their true religion from how evil men have used it to serve their own non-religious purposes. This writer, for example, is a devout Christian, but that fact does not blind him to the chains of bondage hammered on his race in the name of Christianity, or cause him to try to gloss over or soften the records of history when his own religion is unfavorably exposed. 6. To escape at last from our mental house of bondage, we must see this color-crazy world in a clearer perspective. For color-crazy it is. We should begin by drawing a vast African circle of honor around all those millions of Africans of mixed blood, often referred to as mulattoes, who from the earliest times to the present have stood steadfast and loyally identified with the race of their originally black mothers. They deserved special honor exactly because they did not have to do so when amalgamation of the races spread over Egypt and the Arabic world, and they had compelling reasons for not being identified with black-skinned Africans, for they were classified as white and therefore not subject to enslavement. This fact is of the greatest importance in understanding the history of this race, for if skipped over, as it always has been, that history will remain confused. Therefore we have pointed out that when the general enslavement of whites and mulattoes ended, and slavery was confined to those with black skins, the color of black itself became the trademark of slavery, and therefore anathema, evil, and the worst that could happen to a human being was to be born black. And this is why we have drawn an African circle of honor around those of mixed blood who, in spite of all this, even through the most frightful centuries, split off from their pro-white and anti-black brothers and sisters to remain with the unfortunate blacks. Where the future of an entire race is the concern, the importance of being fully aware of the great difference in racial attitude that has always existed among those of mixed blood should be self-evident. The course of that future will be determined by a growing mass of intelligence and alertness which enables people to use quite different criteria in the search for honest and reliable leaders. At present, our mental laziness permits any smooth and fast talker to assume leadership. Just knowing about anti-black mulattoes will not remove need to know what each individual stands for. Color is no guide, for the blackest of the blacks may be an arch traitor. The best route emerges before the eyes in every race-wide situation. A race-wide organization, in this case to provide mass education in the homes, the kind of community-wide information that will enable the people to choose dedicated and competent leaders and other essential workers, and ferret out the exploiters who worm their way into key offices which enable them as representatives of the white man to defeat or check any organized all black efforts to advance. 7. In view of the facts already set forth, it should not be surprising why so many American Negroes are identifying themselves with the Arabic Middle East or Asia rather than Africa. The fact that in the United States all Africans and persons with any discernible African blood were legally classified as Negroes made a most important difference, and contrasted sharply with other parts of the world where mulattoes are either classified as white or given the legal status of a separate ethnic group with a privileged status above those with dark or black complexion. Even mulattoes arriving from some of the West Indian islands are often shocked to find the American practice of classifying all of them as Negroes. They resent it, and many will not live in the United States for this reason. By contrast, the anti-black mulattoes in the United States, while resenting the indiscriminate grouping also, have accepted both Negro and colored as proper names, and black tentatively for strategic leadership reasons, have sought a breakthrough by spearheading drives for integration, forced busing for racial balance, and scatter-site housing in white suburbia. Most important, during the past 20 years, increased travel enabled them to learn with certainty that mulattoes are indeed considered white throughout the Muslim Middle East and Muslim North Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Tunis, Morocco, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and the Holy Land of Islam, Saudi Arabia. Now, anyone who is even moderately acquainted with the history of the Arab slave trade for the past 2,000 years would know that as a result, there are not only millions of mulattoes throughout the Arab states, but countless thousands of jet black Africans whose ancestors were born there also. All speak Arabic, are Muslims, and consider themselves Arabs for exactly the same reasons as emphasized before, that blacks born in the United States consider themselves Americans. One can very readily understand why those Negroes who wish to escape black or African identity are pushing for an identity of color with their kind in those countries where they are white and therefore in a class distinctly superior to the still enslaved or subordinated blacks still living there. And they have every right, natural and otherwise, to follow their own inclinations. Indeed, the race would experience the joyful relief that comes with a new birth of freedom if this particular group would stop trying to operate in both the white and black worlds, stop straddling the fence, and get down decisively on the side of its choice. They will never do this, of course, because they enjoy the same double advantage of a most famous ancestor, Leo Africanus, who, when pressed in Rome to say whether he considered himself African or white, replied that he shifted to whatever side it was expedient to be on from time to time. Quote, "When the Africans are on top, I am an African." End quote. This class of mixed bloods will always be an embarrassing threat to the other millions who, although also of mixed blood, are wholly African in spirit and pride. These latter are the Adam Clayton Powells of the race, who are not only above suspicion, but are regarded by the black masses as inseparably their own. That a little learning is a dangerous thing is also indicated among the relatively few who preach about the Jews being a black people, Joseph and Mary being black, and Jesus Christ also black, etc. A group of American Negroes recently went to Israel claiming that they were the original Jews, the lost tribe of Israel, and that therefore the country belonged to them. Movements of this kind would not deserve even a sentence here if they were not indicative of the frustrations and confusion, and the frantic pulling in different directions which further bind the race in chains difficult to break. There are mental chains as well as blinders. Now, the confusion about black Jews derives from the same historic developments which have been explained about white and black Arabs, exactly the same. For we have shown that Jews were in Africa from the earliest times, and that Africans were in Palestine from the earliest times. And just as the Jews ruled in African Egypt for several centuries, so also the Africans ruled over Palestine for several centuries. But, unlike the Arabs, the Jews never engaged in the general enslavement of blacks. In cases of warfare, either side might capture segments of the population to be marched off to work in the victorious nation, a notable instance being the Jewish captivity in Egypt and their later emancipation and return under the leadership of Moses. Not only did many colored Jews cross the Red Sea with Moses, but doubtless many converted jet black Jews, such as the wife of the lawgiver himself. Furthermore, as in the case of the Arabs, we often confuse race with religion. The people we call Jews indiscriminately are Hebrews by race and Jews by religion. Anyone can be a Jew, but not a Hebrew. The Hebrews and the Arabs are both white Semitic peoples, and no number of offsprings by non-Hebrews and non-Arabs, or adherents to either religion, will ever change this absolute fact. After all those centuries of racial mixing, there was nothing unusual about the appearance of great colored leaders in Palestine or anywhere else in Asia, including, from time to time, their rise to kingship in Israel, Syria, Aram, or Mesopotamia, etc. But the white Jews, Hebrews, and white Arabs remain exactly what they always were, white, and this is why. And who pretends not to know it? That there is a racial crisis today in Israel between the ruling white Jews and the colored Jews who have migrated there from the above-mentioned lands. These are the colored adherents of Judaism from Arab countries, but who never became Muslims. It will be going overboard to drown if we follow fanatics in attempting to black eyes everything and everybody that suit their fancy. It is quite useless and unnecessary to try to make either Jesus Christ or the Prophet Muhammad black or even colored. However, the most important point to be noted in reference to the American Negro group, the lost tribe of Israel, which landed there only to be rejected, is that it illustrates dramatically all that has been presented in these pages about those groups within the African race that are trying hard to escape from it, seeking their identity with a white people, any white people. And we have said, let them go. The only thing we object to, and will fight to the end, is the attempt to program the whole race again on a march away from itself, or allow them to remain as leaders of the same people from which they wish to flee. 8. Finally, another major obstacle to unity and progress that is hardly ever openly discussed must not only be discussed but attacked in a nationwide program in the home. Obviously, only a massive nationwide organization can deal successfully with any of our massive problems. This one concerns an inheritance from slavery. It is the attitude of indifference and disrespect of blacks toward blacks. To the average black, another black is not as important as anyone of another race. Therefore, black clerks or salespersons will serve whites more quickly and politely than they will serve members of their own race. This evil spirit from slavery pervades all classes, whether lawyers, carpenters, doctors, painters, nurses, shop owners, school heads, teachers, repairmen, garbage and trashmen, paper hangers, taxi drivers, movers and haulers, employees in homes. The only thing you can count on being first class are the charges, which are often higher than that what the whites pay for the services these same blacks give at the highest level of their competence. The exceptions to this general rule are not enough to affect such a damaging situation. This is why, in proposing specific steps in organizing a whole people, emphasis is placed on training at the very outset for all persons involved directly in the work. For the great task of developing real mutual respect must be undertaken by people who have it themselves. We are no longer interested in the often hypocritical rhetoric of brothers and sisters. Too often, brothers and sisters are mouthed by some with the biggest afro bush, while mugging, raping, or killing these same brothers and sisters. Out of this general attitude, which serves the white supremacy position so well, develops an indifference to high standards of excellence in all black situations. The idea that efficiency and expertise are unnecessary in all black situations, and that strict business methods in the areas of auditing, accounting, or strict financial procedures in the collection, deposit, and management of other people's money, these safeguards are thought by many to have no place in the black community. Here we have a contradictory mental twist among blacks. For while distrust of one another is characteristic, when it comes to the thousands of do-good organizations into which we pour our millions of dollars, the idea is that one should trust the brothers and sisters who collect, hold, and control the people's money. Re-education will be required for the two mandatory changes in attitude. One toward each other in terms of mutual respect, and the other a change in attitude about efficiency, expertise in business management, and financial responsibility and administration. Unless we begin to develop and expand these first, a great survival movement will fail just as many other noble efforts failed because the rush neglected the necessary foundation. Chapter 15. The Shape of Things to Come, a Master Plan. It has been previously stated in substance that although the African people may continue their present course of weakness on into the future with thousands of ununified organizations, powerless and therefore forever dependent, like half men and half women unable to use their own brains, although this tragic situation may continue into an uncertain future, we say it can never be said again that such a hopeless situation persists because no member of the race or any group has ever studied the principal problems and the obstacles to their solutions based on history, and then offered an overall plan as one of the possible lines of march out of the morass. For there have been a number of plans. The weakness of some is that instead of being presented as a proposal, a point of beginning for the express purpose of making such revisions or amendments as the people think best, they are too often presented authoritatively as fait accompli, a reflection of the leader's ego, infallible wisdom, and power. In this section are the specifics of a master plan. It is to be the functioning framework of a unifying race organization of a kind never presented to the black race before. To make all of this crystal clear, what is meant by race organization, how it will differ from anything attempted before, and what should be some of its guiding principles and understandings are enumerated below. For emphasis, A few of the most important propositions are necessary recapitulations of points already presented in preceding pages. The main focus here is on blacks in the United States because, whether they know it or not, they are in the very best situation to be the lead-off example for the whole African world. 1. Race organization here means a nationwide organization of blacks only, but it means much more. The organization should be so structured through all elements of the black population and on an active membership so vast that it would go far beyond the accepted scientific criteria for determining the wishes of a whole people. In other words, the first objective would be to have a representative scheme of organization that would, beyond all doubt, be the voice of Black America, and to keep this in actual fact by periodic polls as crucial issues affecting the race as a group arise. No such organization ever existed among us, hence no real unity exists among us. 2. Far from being a separatist movement, as these terms are generally understood, the organization would be cooperative in the fullest and most humane meaning of that word. For the black masses are not going to give up their 400 years of investment in America, 400 years of investments in blood and labor to build up its present great wealth. They are not about to separate, migrate anywhere, leaving all those centuries of toil as a free gift to the whites. This means that we shall continue to battle for equal employment and advancement throughout the United States and in every area of the nation's life. The expansion of voting and elections to public office, and in general the exercise without exceptions of all the rights and duties of other citizens. This also represents our conviction that the black masses will not be seriously influenced by the pipe dream of a separate, independent nation or republic within the territorial confines of the United States. They have too much common sense for that, and would reject such movements in sheer self-defense, even if the whites withdrew and turned over 5 southern states for such a purpose. Negro integrationists would oppose this, of course, but for an obviously quite different reason. Their drive is to break up existing black communities and scatter the people among hostile whites. A great nationwide organization of blacks, therefore, would be in the only possible position to cooperate and work out common problems with whites as equals, and this is from a position backed by organized power, the only position respected at this stage of human development. 3. It was stated above that we would continue to push for equal employment and political opportunities on all fronts. The sadly missing link, however, is that we ourselves have done little to create employment opportunities. If we say that as a race we are too poor to engage in productive activities that would create thousands of jobs for our young people, if we continue traditional pleas of poverty, our total spending of $42 to $50 billion each year rises up to call us liars. We are able. Those who wish to engage in private enterprise for their own personal benefit will always be free to do so, and there will always be some pride in pointing out this or that rich black capitalist. When we consider the welfare of the whole community, however, we are getting back to a basic African ideology, which is that the welfare of the people as a whole takes priority over that of the individual. The organization will be a national community made up of the numerous black communities. In demanding rights, it will also assume the race's responsibility for creating some of the opportunities itself. The most crucial point to be considered and remembered is the vast difference between what the blacks do as a race from the viewpoint of world opinion and what a black individual does. 4. Not unity just for unity, but unity for great achievements, not one of which can be realized without it. The first great understanding should be that the unity we seek cannot be achieved by organization alone. Even an organization of several million members will have no lasting basis for existence unless the total membership is mutually and individually involved in activities which each feels is important and will be directly beneficial to him in his own lifetime. Direct membership by families may turn out to be more important than one based on a federation of existing organizations. Actual unity will be achieved not by preaching, pleading, or exhortations, but almost unconsciously as people work together for mutual benefits to each other and the advancement of the race as a whole. Meaningful, practical activities which involve even children in attacking the problems of their race will be the cement which we call unity. The second great understanding should be that the economic activities are so fundamental in any truly upward movement, so clearly indispensable at this stage in history, that it should be unnecessary to state it even. The still existing slave mentality causes millions of us to shy away from this basis of life itself because it requires more initiative, training, and work, and less talk than politics. Consequently, the overall picture we present to the world is that of a race of dependent job seekers, ourselves unable to engage in the large-scale production of any of the necessities of life, whether they are the shoes and clothing we wear or the food we eat. Hence, the billions of dollars we spend each year just in these categories we eagerly give back to the whites to strengthen their power over us, while becoming richer and richer at the same time. Economic development activities are direct survival activities, the means of existence, helping to provide the means of existence. It is as simple as that. The main goals of a great unity movement can never be reached unless the organization has its own self-generating financial resources to protect, defend, and promote the interests of the race. Organizations which must be subsidized by government and foundation grants to exist are not in an independent position. The third understanding should be clear that all community enterprises, contrary to capitalism, will be owned and operated by the people in the community, that they will be the shareholders, that all the trained personnel in each store, plant, or any other enterprise will be shareholders, and therefore part owners of such establishments, that all profits will belong to the people, but full responsibility for the first-class service, efficiency, and general business management will be that of elected managers, and not the general membership. Finally, the scope and nature of the proposed divisions in the last section of this work will doubtless make even clearer the real significance of a nationwide organization. For in addition to the work involved in raising not just the hopes, but the level of life of those lower down, equally important would be what this massive consolidation of unused power can do in the following areas. 1. It can influence American foreign policy and actions in regard to crucial matters affecting African nations just as effectively as American Jews can influence this country's relations with Israel. And, as another example, it could stop the use of millions of black taxpayers' dollars to help Portugal suppress the freedom fighters in its African empire. If a deaf ear is turned to such protests, several million blacks could pledge to withhold the payment of taxes until all armed assistance for the war against Africans ceases. Something a disunited people are helpless to do now. This would be real Pan-Africanism. 2. An overall race organization can deal more effectively with some important problems at home more effectively than any smaller independent group can do nationwide. The higher rents and higher prices paid for goods and services in inner cities than those paid in the affluent white suburbs. This open yet silent war against the blacks is being accepted because we are helplessly disorganized. The studies have already been made. The facts have been established. What the people need is a national defender to further expose and attack this and other fronts of the silent war that is quietly being carried on each day against a now helpless people, many of whom are not really aware of its extent. 3. It can carry on a nationwide education program directly into the homes, reversing the poor and deprived homes' negative outlook to a positive one. Heading the information agenda would be a focus on those death-dealing diseases which impair both mind and body in the diseased wombs of mothers. The widest information should be given on the fact that ignorance or indifference to personal health can result in children being born mentally and physically retarded, and thus handicapped for life, not by genetic preconditions, but by the acts of their parents. Home studies for the entire family can be promoted, and the home beautiful can become a principal aim in every black community. 4. It can oversee the welfare of the race by maintaining a check on the extent blacks are secretly used exclusively as guinea pigs in dangerous experiments by various medical projects. Neither the Tuskegee experiments nor the number of our people who needlessly suffered and died from them must be passed over as an unusual and isolated incident. The many years the government and the doctors were able to keep this particular secret should be a matter of grave concern. It is also important to know to what extent Negro physicians participate in such experiments. For, of course, no one should be asked to believe that such experiments could be carried out on blacks only in such large numbers and over such a long period without any black doctors knowing about them. 5. Such a race movement would be superficial indeed if it proceeded without its principal foundation, which is the ownership of vast tracts of farm and timberland in various parts of the country. The current ideological cry of "we must have land" is valid only if we answer the question, for what purpose or to what end? Our sloganeers rarely explain the slogans, but land is for production, and its ownership and use will become more and more necessary for survival, since even now 75% of the American population is concentrated on only 2% of the land in cities and towns. Land should be for a more abundant life, carried on in large-scale production programs such as cattle ranches for beef, hog farms for pork products, turkey farms, poultry and eggs, vegetables of all kinds, corn, wheat, etc. 6. It can have, on behalf of the race it represents, a central national bank as the People's National Depository and Central Financing Agency, a national auditing and accounting service, a general insurance system covering especially those categories where blacks are arbitrarily denied protection or are charged much higher rates than those paid by whites. Home improvement, building, and small loans could all be handled by community credit unions or organized on a somewhat different basis than existing credit unions. For one thing, all community credit unions in various sections of a city would be united as one to reinforce each other's services when needed. 7. It can give new hope and a new sense of direction to the thousands behind prison walls, and in time practically empty the prisons of those convicted of crimes for which the whites go free. The important thing, however, is that the youths, men and women coming out of prisons, would have something to come to, training or retraining for their much needed service in helping to build and advance themselves as they build and advance their race. They have never had such an opportunity. 8. The great change in outlook and the new inspiration that will come to black children and youth are immeasurable. Just to know that their parents are engaged in and actively a part of a great movement will give a new sense of worth and dignity. No longer will it be necessary to shout in unison, "I am somebody." For the children of janitors, trash haulers, maids, and parents in similar occupations, their children will regard them with pride and in a new light. We are great if we are an active part of a great movement. Up to now, black children have been badly cheated. They have never had the inspiring reasons to study and advance which are constantly before the eyes of white children, and this central fact of difference has led me to suppose that some providential favor must have enabled the black students of the world to do so well in the face of it all. Finally, and obviously, none of the above can be achieved on a nationwide scale without a nationwide movement of several million members, organized as a race, working as a race for its interest as full-fledged American citizens. How to begin, and by whom? In the section titled "The Liberation of Our Minds," the various factors which explain the generally dependent disposition of African people today were outlined in some detail. They reveal the tragic extent to which a dominant group can shape and control even the thinking of the suppressed group. This meant that, unlike other peoples, the blacks voluntarily remained mentally enslaved even after their physical emancipation. That Caucasianization of the blacks was so well done over so many centuries that it is doubtful if real liberation of our minds will be achieved in this generation. Yet the black youth in the 1960s brought about the greatest reversal of the race's attitude toward itself that had ever been achieved before. There is, therefore, no grounds for despair and much ground for faith if we understand that total liberation will be slow even with the best efforts, and that there will always be those who have the white viewpoint on race and will never abandon it. These cannot stop the onward march of the whole people to human equality and dignity. But who will begin to lay the first stone in the foundation of the greatest movement for racial unity and power ever undertaken? And how might such a task begin? Some of us who would otherwise be naturally expected to lead off have already spent so many years in studying the history of the crisis and analyzing the problems that we are now near the end of our journey, and must pass the undertaking to those more able to carry on. This, like every great movement, will be initiated by just one individual. No great gathering or crowd starts a movement. Quite the contrary. When the many assemble, it is because someone has already begun. One person has already thought matters through and resolved that a beginning must be made. He should not be the usual leader whose fiery denunciations of wrongs against blacks may be counted on to stir emotions, and that is all. The one person needed is simply one who is dedicated with a sense of mission for his race, seeking nothing but the opportunity to serve it. There are doubtless countless thousands of such sons and daughters of the race, willing and ready, but either not knowing what to do or afraid of their own capabilities, and leave it to somebody else. Yet, all one person has to do is to ask 5 or 6 other people to study the plan, and then meet later to discuss it. Just 5 or 6 persons, not one of whom needs to be a big name. This small initial group of 6 could have each member become a committee of 1, each to nominate 3 other people to study the plan before the next meeting, at which time the 18 members could become the nucleus for a general organizing committee. Further nominations to the organizing committee should be representative of all groups, students, laborers, clerks, etc., as well as professionals. The representatives on the organizing committee may be from national organizations, all black, or smaller organizations, lodges, clubs, etc. This core committee, after a series of meetings during which the master plan has been studied in detail and revisions or amendments have been proposed for future action, could then proceed to develop and carry out plans for the formation of a national organizing committee composed of representatives from various sections of the country. Note that even at the outset of organizing, some funds will be required if effective work is to be done. The work of the National Organizing Committee would be crucial. It would have to 1. Summarize the main features of the plan and outline them in the simplest terms for publication, distribution, and broadcast to the black world. 2. Determine ways and means of funding the organizing process. 3. Determine the best general membership enrollment procedures, such as moving state by state, setting 1-year membership goals for each state, instead of attempting to organize throughout the nation all at once. 4. Divide each state into districts, each with an organizing committee with a chairman. The same divisional scheme for towns and cities, each section having a committee and chairman. 5. Draw heavily on young people, who really started the movement and who should therefore be a most powerful force in carrying it on. 6. Conduct in advance a nationwide poll to determine a. How many black people in America desire the proposed overall organization of the race, and b. How many agree to participate in its activity. 7. Clarify the scheme of organization to emphasize the individuality of membership, i.e., an association or union, etc., may join as such, but its main role would be setting the example for its members who may or may not wish to join. The organization would have its own membership card, and each of its members who joined would have his or her own membership card. In the case of organization by families, the most significant innovation, each family would have a family membership card, and each member of the family from age 5 on would have his or her own membership card. 8. Set the national membership goals as 2-year plans, 3-year plans, 5-year plans, etc., but always in terms of millions. 9. Determine time and place for the first General Assembly for the formal ratification and launching of action program. 10. Have information and publicity committee maintain various media to keep constantly before the people the plans, purposes, or goals of the movement, who is doing what, and the progress being made. 11. Propose annual awards to individuals and groups that have been outstanding in their work for racial unity through organized action. Everything in this final chapter, then, is a guideline for thinking and rethinking about how to deal with the situation in which we live. The plan itself is a proposal. Revisions and amendments will be proposals, all tentative until approved by the people. The functioning organization would be under the overall administration of a National Council of Leaders, headed by a national chairman, following traditional patterns of African Council of Elders. Every state, city, or community division would also be organized under councils of leaders. The organizational structure of the movement should be by major divisions for the major activities, each divided into departments for carrying on their respective programs. Special study and analysis should be given to each division and each department coming under it, for there could be no better way to understand the scope and significance of what is presented here. This should be easy for all, because I have not been dealing with idealistic, unattainable dreams or mere academic theories, but very practical day-to-day problems. In so doing, I have deliberately avoided the academic and often esoteric language of scholarship. Structure by divisions. 1. The division of economic planning and development. The division of economic planning and development should be the foundation of the organized efforts and a principal source of support and promotion of the most important activities of the whole race. A guiding principle should be that all promoted community enterprises should be cooperatively owned and controlled by the people of the community, and that each enterprise be under highly trained management and competent service personnel. Departments. A. Department for promotion of community cooperative enterprises. 1. To conduct surveys to determine what the people want and need. 2. Soundness of the project. 3. Ways and means of community financing and securing trained personnel and management. The community enterprises would be nationwide, and while owned and operated by the people in the various towns and cities, would operate as a nationwide chain of stores and markets for mass buying power and distribution. This would be the system whether the enterprises are food markets, shoe stores, department stores, or any other undertaking which can be developed as a chain store system. B. The Department of Finance, Banking, and Credit Unions. 1. For promoting a consortium of banks operated by members of the race, and the expansion of financing and banking systems. These would be branches of a central national bank of the organization. 2. Credit unions for individual assistance and building and loan services, primarily for communities without needed building and loan services for blacks. C. The Institute of Technology and Personnel Training. This would be a key program of the movement, for while it would engage in the training of expert technicians for the various fields of operations under the plan, a principal objective would be the kind of creative expertise required for large-scale manufacturing operations: shoe manufacturing, men, women, and children's clothes, hats, underwear, canning, frozen foods, furniture, mattress making, and other products. The personnel training sections would have an importance for the race beyond the ordinary. Blacks are generally still quicker and more polite when serving white people. Their attitude toward members of their own race is one of indifference and often insulting. This is known to be true both in Africa and America. Yet this crucial question is not mentioned even in discussion of why Negro businesses fail. This negative and essentially anti-black attitude of blacks toward blacks, a leftover from slavery and our history, must be uncompromisingly and even ruthlessly dealt with in both training and day-to-day administration. D. Central Office of Accounting and Finance Control. Here again is an area in which blacks are weak: money management and control. This Central Office of Accounting and Finance Control would keep a rigorous check on all income and expenditures of the national organization and provide similar auditing and accounting units for the local community organizations and enterprises. E. Department of Land Reclamation and Farming. Principal aim: to secure large tracts of land in various parts of the country to 1. Raise vegetables of all kinds for the various community markets. 2. Hogs, beef, cattle, poultry, and eggs. 3. Farm homes for persons who would work on. And 4. Country camp centers for rest and play. Special note: without the farmlands, we may as well forget about canning and frozen food industries, or reducing the cost of living for our people by supplying their community stores with fresh vegetables, meats, butter, and eggs from their own farms. Vast landholding is the cornerstone of the master plan. F. Transport and distribution. This department would be primarily concerned with long-distance shipping from farms, plants, and other points, and maintaining the trucks, shipping vans, and required maintenance services. G. Central Purchasing and Supply Agency. In addition to its obvious functions, this department would be responsible for the proper location and supervision of the various warehouses required as the community enterprises expand. All of the departments and agencies listed above would be in the Division of Economic Planning and Development. 2. Division of Political Action. 1. Promote and assist voter registration. 2. Provide profile of candidates, local, state, and national. 3. Prepare bills and other measures affecting the group for state legislatures and the U.S. Congress. 4. Liaison with White House. And 5. All actions that can be taken through the political process to protect and promote the welfare of Black Americans. 3. Division of Public Education. Purpose: to achieve a higher standard of teaching and student achievement on every level involved in the education of black children and youth, and to develop a better system of general adult education in all black communities. This division would include: A. Foundation for directed research, field studies, and the training of scholars for neglected areas in various aspects of African life and history. B. A general publishing board. 1. Textbooks and other works related to progress of the race. 2. Newspapers and magazines. A professional journal, community action newsletters, etc. C. Committee of visitors. These should be in every community to 1. Become acquainted with teachers, students, and the textbooks and other learning materials. 2. To determine to what extent, if any, the anti-African or anti-black feeling on the part of many teachers of black youth may be hidden the obstacle to their progress in schoolwork. Every committee of school visitors should be elected by the people of the community and should report directly to them. But education here means far more than school education. It means spreading light through a comprehensive program into the deprived areas of the community. New standards for better health, better homes and gardens, neighborhood improvement activities, and sponsoring neighborhood conferences on questions of mutual community and educational interests. A division of education would justify its existence if it did nothing more than conduct studies as a basis for proposing certain guidelines for the race in the United States. The general confusion and mess-up in the Black Studies movement, for example, could have been avoided if the young people had had somewhere to turn for help in determining procedures and priorities. What united guiding voice was there to advise them that all fields could not possibly or sensibly be started at once, that there were neither a fraction of the trained teachers required, nor suitable books or other needed teaching and learning materials? Only 3 or 4 courses could have been profitably started, while research and training prepared the way for a real educational experience in others to be started later. Even then, common sense would have dictated that black studies can only be carried on in certain schools by certain teachers. To force them into white schools only because they are integrating and find it an expedient policy for the moment is one of those black illusions of achievement that still lead us astray. Equally ridiculous is the assumption that unwilling and uncommitted white and Negro teachers are going to now deal fairly with the very aspects of civilization which they have systematically excluded from instruction all along. If this were not the case, of course, there will be no such phenomenon today as black studies. 4. Division of Community Services. A. Department of Health and Sanitation. 1. Councils of Physicians, Dentists, Nurses, Medical Aid, Laymen. A. Home Visiting Nurse Service. 2. Community Clinics. 3. Community Clean Block and Alley Program. 4. Better Home Life Counseling Service. 5. A Home Beautiful Program. B. Legal Aid Services. All matters of injustice because of race and the legal work of the movement. 5. Division of Youth Activities. To assume leadership roles in all areas and undertakings for which they are capable, students and non-students should join hands in the race-building efforts. One of their precious responsibilities should be the Department of Children Affairs, ages 5 to 12, which is in their division. The underlying idea here is to have specific and important roles for all children and youth. 6. Division of Pan-African Affairs. This division would maintain direct contacts and the closest relationship with the people and states of Black Africa. the Caribbean, and the other black population centers around the world. The purposes would be specific. 1. To keep them fully informed on what we are doing and how. 2. To learn from them what they are doing and how. 3. To find out what the obstacles are in each black area, including our own, and to counsel together on ways and means of overcoming the seemingly impossible. 4. To explore for and then actually determine definite ways for mutual assistance. When this is done, we will have moved from the case of Pan-African talk to the work of Pan-Africa in action. 5. To trade in the exchange of goods and services, scientific and technical knowledge. 7. Division of intelligence and security. This division would maintain highly trained intelligence agents to 1. Check internal subversion and activities of agents placed within the organization by others. 2. Secure complete records of all persons employed by or connected with the organization. 3. Promote formation and training of self-protection units everywhere to defend the community against unlawful and unjust raids and other forms of murderous attacks should they occur. This simply means preparedness for defense against attacks by well-known and well-organized citizens paramilitary groups. 8. The Commission for Spiritual Life and Assistance. This should be the race's Great Commission. Its major task would be 1. To determine the direction of civilization. 2. To interpret the spiritual as men and women working on the highest level of humane endeavors to understand the meaning of life while trying to improve it. 3. To enlist the cooperation of white, brown, yellow, red, and any and all other peoples of goodwill in an all-out drive for a better world. 4. To maintain an emergency assistance program for families or communities in distress. 5. And to assume the initiative in seeking the active cooperation of any and all religious faiths and all institutions which are concerned with improving human relations and therefore life itself. 10. Ideology and guidelines. With the development of a movement of this magnitude, the black people may begin to learn at last how utterly futile it is to grasp as their own the ideologies developed by the white world for the people of this white world. They, the black leaders of a still leaderless yet hopeful people, have been and still are expecting the solution of the race's problems to be handed to them on the silver platters of either capitalism or communism. Elements of both of these systems prevailed in Africa several thousand years before either capitalism or Marxism was born in the West. Black people generally could not be expected to know this because, unlike other peoples, they have been completely cut off from their past history and therefore are ignorant of their own philosophy of life, ancient religion, institutions which were borrowed by others. What the need now, therefore, is neither black capitalism nor black communism, both of which benefit those at the top and exploit the masses. But what is needed is an ideology of black Africanism, operating within the framework of the traditional African philosophy of life and the best of its value systems. Guidelines. A. Footnote. For a refresher, read Chapter 6 again, The African Constitution, Birth of Democracy. End of footnote. The movement will seek to achieve the largest possible measure of unity in order, 1. To form the power base as the organized voice of the black people in a particular region or nation. 2. To develop from this position of strength the much needed economic enterprises that will not only create employment opportunities, but, being owned directly by the people in the community, will lower the cost and raise the standard of living for all. B. Financing. There would be a general membership fee. Each community enterprise would be financed initially by the purchase of shares of participating owners. Each share would be at a purchase price in reach of the poorest. Indeed, a special program for shareholding by children should be an important part of the movement. Each share draws a fixed interest as a loan. But unlike capitalism, members do not vote by shares. The member who may be able to buy 100 shares has only one vote, like the member who could buy only one. The objective is a mass membership and a mass patronage of their own enterprises. The additional direct benefits are the patronage dividends received according to the amount purchased in a given period. In private enterprise or black capitalism, this would be profit that the owner makes. Under communism, it goes to the state. Under our community cooperative system, the profit belongs to the people, for the reason for it all is to benefit the people and not to enrich any one person or small group. C. Administration. The organization will be based upon the traditional African constitutional system. 1. There will be no authoritarian presidents or heads. As in traditional Africa, the king or chief was the spokesman of the previously expressed will of the people and the instrument for carrying out that will. The national head or heads of the organization and the head of every unit thereof will function in like manner, issuing no important orders or public statements on behalf of the organization or the race it will represent without consent of the council. 2. The organization will modernize the ancient African Council of Elders only to the extent of changing elders to leaders in order to admit outstanding young people to membership. The Council of Leaders, therefore, become the highest governing authority on each level, local, state, and national, each leader being the elected representative of a constituency to which he is responsible for his actions on the council. This means that on all highly important matters, the leader of the council does not vote independently according to his individual judgment, but must determine in advance the collective will of the people. 3. The highest officer on each level is the chairman of the council. In traditional Africa, this would be the king or chief, who could neither vote nor actively participate in the discussions, since his principal duty was to proclaim and execute the will of the people as it had been determined by their representatives on the council. Within this people-controlled framework, he is still the chief executive officer. 4. To enable the people of the community to have an intelligent or informed opinion about matters of importance. The principal role of leaders is to study and to institute studies upon the basis of which plans are developed and proposals are submitted to the general membership. The leaders propose, they do not order or direct upon their own authority. A direct medium of communication with the people should be the community newsletter. 5. All officers, even though elected for a specified term of years, should be subject to removal for cause at any time by the people. Another African constitutional provision. 6. The organization itself will be one vast union, and no outside organization or union will be allowed to determine its policies, programs, or destiny, no matter under what guise or by what approach the efforts are made. 7. There should be a rigid policy to avoid the development of a top-heavy bureaucracy of high-salaried executives. The success of the movement is going to depend very heavily on the number of people willing to sacrifice in giving some unpaid or not fully paid service. For at least the first 10 years, this will be a sacrifice train. The big salary boys should not get on board. 8. The highest legislative body will be a House of Delegates, representing the various major areas or states according to membership. The House of Delegates would meet every 5 years, but subject to special session called by the chairman of the council or leaders, acting under council's instructions, or it could be called by the people by a referendum. This latter emergency would never occur unless the people lost control of their leaders on the council. D. Every undertaking is to be preceded by study, training, and careful financial planning. There should be long-range and short-range goals. Some goals can be achieved in a relatively short time. Some of a larger magnitude will require several years, even after the first 5 million membership goal is reached, and still others can, like the eternal pyramids, only have their foundations so solidly laid by this generation that the blacks who follow us can continue building on those well-laid foundations at the point where our own labors were ended by time. And something along this line must be the plan. This must be the vision. It is obviously not for the overnight, quick up and quick down boys. This is for black men, women, and their children who seek to find the lost path of their forefathers and start the upward march once again. The final great issue then involves the African race alone. The dismal view from the bridge was reached after a long journey through the centuries. The outlook is distressing because somewhere back down the line of time, the effort to advance toward a higher order of life in something called civilization, by ever widening the gap that separates men from beasts, this effort failed. And it failed because in his sudden and amazing successes in science and technology, man outsmarted himself, concentrating almost entirely on his mind power at the expense of his humanizing spiritual power, became not the master of his machines, but their servant, and in the process of acquiring seemingly limitless power, this segment of the human race became as soulless as its machines and began to destroy or conquer other peoples, seizing their lands and their wealth, while reducing them as nearly as possible to a state of perpetual dependency. In all this, the black people of the world still find themselves in the worst situation of all. The question of today now is, what are the black people themselves going to do? Those who make a profession and money by playing on the emotions, screaming utterly futile invectives and denunciations, these will continue to do so. And those who still preach integration and brotherhood with the whites will keep on marching, singing, and praying, not to God but to the white man, for they are still unable to understand that white America had generally condemned and rejected this peace-loving, brotherly approach of Martin Luther King long before it murdered him. Footnote: it seems to be the general view throughout the black world that polls and other data show that whites are hostile to any kind of movement by blacks for equality, peaceful, non-violent, or otherwise, and that this hostile, anti-King climate produced his murderer as its representative. End of footnote. This present course of a fragmented and unorganized people, if followed, will find the succeeding generations of blacks as weak, leaderless, and powerless as they are today. For their present road is the easy road: mass meetings, big conventions, protest resolutions, and splitting up to follow this or that leader with the greatest gift of gab, all leading exactly nowhere. But to get down to the hard and persistent work of actually doing something, oh, now we will come to the parting of ways. The mere talker may retreat. All talk about black power is empty until we begin to make black power a reality in the only way it can be done, and that is by building, step by step, a race organization so great that it will not only be the voice of a united people, but will carry on efficiently an economic development program to assist their advance on all other fronts. The Organization for Unity plan presented in this final chapter is an effort to answer the question, which way you still enshackle blacks? To answer in specific terms and in some detail, it sets forth rather clearly one way out. It will be simply great if someone comes up with an even better plan for racial unity through action. Whatever is proposed must be a grand design. Nothing else will serve. It must be bold, daring, an effort of unheard of audacity by blacks, and one that will bring forth the enemy scream of utopian, too unrealistic, or just another grandiose dream. This enemy, and let us not forget it for a single minute, is deeply entrenched within the race as well as outside. This means that we must face up to the fact that we have problems of a kind and obstacles to overcome which no other people have. The task we now face will test the genius of the black race. The blacks in the United States are in the best position as a lead-off example for the rest of the African race. For such a movement would further change the course of history and inspire black youth everywhere, along with their elders, with a new vision, a sense of direction, and the kind of outlook that gives meaning to study as the source of inventions and new discoveries. The challenge to the blacks on this continent is to overcome the centuries of their own American version of tribalism and disunity. It is their greatest challenge in this area of perpetual crisis. They will accept it if they have to come to understand at last that equal rights and equal justice will never come from appeals to the mighty and granted as an act of grace, but only from their own position of power and influence, which develop from a united people engaged in great and vast undertakings of their own. If we fail to accept this challenge at this critical turning point in our history, we will have proved ourselves unworthy of having any descendants, and our very names should be forgotten by them, or cursed by the farthest generation. Biographical Notes. Section A. Standing alone and isolated in the field for over 35 years, William Leo Hansberry was the teacher who introduced me to the systematic study of African history and, of equal importance, to the ancient documentary sources. His massive documentation of early Greek and Roman historians and geographers of Africa covered several years of labor, leaving one to wonder how the utterly false teaching that Africa had no written history spread over the world. For entirely apart from the remarkable contributions of archaeology in the 19th and 20th centuries, there have always been more than sufficient written records to reconstruct the history of the blacks from the earliest times. And I am fully aware that most of the written records have been lost. The works of Hecataeus, for example, were lost. He was one of the first Greeks to study and write in Egypt, while much of the most significant data are fragments scattered here and there throughout many larger works, as though they were thrown in incidentally. There were some works devoted wholly to ancient Egypt and Ethiopia. The one to whom we probably owe the greatest debt is the father of history himself. Herodotus' history was comprehensive, in a sense not equaled by any of the other early writers. Diodorus, however, if not quite the equal of the master, ran a close second. His general history may not have equaled that of Herodotus in lucidity and style, neither of which is a matter of too much concern for the researcher, but it is replete with the kind of historical data without which we would not have the additional sidelights on the darkened pages of black history. Both Herodotus and Diodorus were outstanding in setting forth for posterity the attitude of the white world of their day toward the black world, the extreme reverse of what it is today. The reason is plain. The early blacks were the most advanced of all the peoples known to them. This they did not hesitate to declare and to acknowledge that their own European civilization had borrowed heavily from Africa, and borrowed even more heavily in the field of religion. For this, later Western historians have never forgiven them. Pliny the Elder is a fair example of writers on Africa, referred to above, where one must wade through a mass of irrelevant matter to find the bits and pieces of data scattered throughout large volumes. Yet, these fragments are often of the highest importance, as they are in the case of Pliny's Historia Natural. In this regard, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are in a class by themselves. Like many other works that give insights into the early history of Africans, they also have no such purpose. Moreover, the Iliad and Odyssey are non-history history, a myth combining fantasy with facts. Homer's importance in African history, however, has little to do with the precise truth of any particular story. Rather, as in the case of the works of Herodotus and Diodorus, Homer mirrors the very high status of the black world of his day, and the unmistakable deference of the white race to that world. In my studies under Professor Hansberry, I had read the works of the writers discussed above, and most of those mentioned in this section below. But the adverse criticism of a whole school of eminent modern scholars led me back for a more painstaking restudy and critical analysis of all the questions under attack. Interestingly enough, almost all of the statements made by the ancient historians that have been challenged concern, directly or indirectly, the role of the blacks in history. My second approach to Herodotus and the others was with the certainty that I was just as competent to evaluate their works, see exaggerations, and as capable of separating facts from fiction as Sir Alan Gardiner or any of the members of his school of thought. Among other writers who made noteworthy contributions in varying degrees was Strabo, whose Geographica included history along with its main subject matter. Plato and Plutarch are reference sources, the latter's De Isidae et Osirade being more directly relevant. Quite a number of the historians and geographers near the end of the BC era drew heavily on the works of such early writers as Hecataeus, Argathocarides, Herodotus, and Manetho. If it had been my purpose to mention the early historians on Africa in order of importance, Manetho, the African historian, would have headed the list, for the records of this Greek-speaking native son of the 4th century BC are authoritative sources which no scholar on Egypt ignores. His annals differ in many respects from other records, e.g., those of the great Jewish historian of the period, Josephus, the King List, the Torn Canon, etc. These differences in names, spelling, and dates about which so many scholars sweat and wrangle never did seem to me to be of earth-shaking importance. Quite the contrary, it would have been strange if all of these different chronologies had been uniformly the same. It should be remembered that all of these 4th and 5th century historians were covering events extending back from 4 to 6,000 years before their time. The numerous discoveries of relatively recent archaeology have substantially confirmed their work. Examples are the inscriptions found on numerous palettes, stelae, the walls of tombs and temples, and the Palermo and Rosetta stones. Some of the best histories of the earliest periods were written by archaeologists such as Petrie, and others appearing in the formal bibliography below. Coming on the scene over 2,000 years after Manetho, Herodotus, Diodorus, Strabo, they supplemented the works of these first scholars with additional evidence that had been left in the keeping of the long since dead and forgotten or recovered from the sands. Petrie headed a line of investigators and writers without whose works the world would be intellectually poorer. Breasted, Budge, Arkell, Africanus, Bakey, Boas, Delafosse, Garstand, Griffith, Nims, and others. The illustrious roll is long. The Bible is one of our richest sources for many different sidelights on the black world. With the spread of Islam in Africa and the entrance of France, Arab and French writers dominated the scenes up to and through the 19th centuries. French and Arab sources therefore became indispensable in African research. Indeed, the same may be said of investigators and writers from all the invading countries. The fact that I reject many of their unspoken presuppositions and the inevitable conclusions they reached therefrom has nothing to do with the usefulness of their works or the brilliance of their scholarship. Even some of the authors with whom I most bitterly disagree, nevertheless, led me to rewarding sources I had neither seen nor had been aware of. It is also rewarding, though in an unhappy way, to see no end to the accumulation of examples that further confirm viewpoints I actually wish were untrue. But as the final chapters here were being written, Professor Robert W. July's big 650 pages of a history of the African people came off the press as the latest justification of my indictment of Western historians. I recommend it for reading because it is a 1970 edition of scholarship, skillfully carrying out its traditional work on the blacks. Part 1, Ancient Africa, rearranges, omits, and misrepresents many of the well-known facts in order to fit the main racial theory. The large number of pictures, like the mass of factual data in the book, can easily disguise its main thrust and theme. The black race is inferior. In the bibliography that follows, I left out quite a number of secondary works used because so many of them seem to be little more than repetitions of those selected. My decision to eliminate almost all of the periodical literature used was not easy, especially as regards the special studies in professional journals. However, there is a point where an enough is enough conclusion is reached. Those who have a mania for the latest works published as their guide will miss the boat here, for some of our most valuable sources were the oldest publications. Some can be seen only in libraries and special museum collections. Others are microfilmed. Research sources are no longer a problem. During the last few years, there have been many large and comprehensive Africana bibliographies published in Europe and America. The new interest and work in the field of oral history are among the most significant developments in recent times. My own field studies were largely involved with oral tradition. This fact should be repeated finally in connection with the discussion of sources, because the oral records played an important role in many aspects of this work. End of Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization. Read by Exam Info.